Protests against tech giants are erupting everywhere, in Chile, Uruguay and the United States. While water pipes run dry and the soil dries out, Amazon, Microsoft and Google are building massive data centers in regions already suffering from drought. Computing power requires enormous amounts of water, leaving little for local communities and agriculture. More data, more cloud computing, more AI. And it's accelerating, with no signs of slowing down. Environmental protection or technological progress? Is it possible to have both? Data centers and the battle for water. Typically, a data center is planned, and then there's a lot of pushback. There have been protests in Latin America. The region is facing extreme drought and water shortages. Uruguay especially struggled in 2023 during its worst drought in 75 years. And then Google happened to show up at exactly the same time.
Google wanted to use 7.6 million liters of water per day, enough to supply 22,000 people, and during a drought, an extreme water crisis.
Daniel Pena is a scientist and activist. He's critical of the lack of community input.
There was no public dialogue and no public hearing. The project was classified as Category B, considered low to moderate risk. As a result, public involvement was minimal.
Daniel Pena is concerned about significant environmental impacts from the Google Cloud project. The Santa Lucia River is important for the capital city, Montevideo. The battle over water has already begun here. When there's no clean water from the tap, bottled water is the only option left.
Not everyone can afford bottled water. People on low incomes don't have the money. The water tastes bad. It causes stomach aches, sometimes even headaches.
AI and cloud computing are booming. Data centers, the backbone of AI, need massive computing power and water. Global demand is growing exponentially. These huge centers are often built in some of the world's driest regions, and resistance is growing. People want more transparency, a say in the process, clean air and clean water. That's the situation in Uruguay in the summer of 2025. Construction on Google's $850 million cloud project near Montevideo has been underway for a year and will take more than 2. It promises jobs and innovation, and local and national leaders see it as a key investment.
I think the process was good. I think it's clear that it's now in the construction phase and that the project hasn't caused any major inconveniences.
Virginia Garcia is an urban planner and the director of territorial planning for the city.
We hope that once it's up and running, they can generate synergies that can attract other types of industries and activities associated with technological innovation.
What companies are we talking about? Who are the major global players in the computing power business? It's the big 3: Amazon subsidiary AWS, Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud. Together they account for 2/3 of the market. Why is so much being built? Because we want it. Industry, the economy, society. The demand is there. But the environmental impact is significant. In many large data centers, much of the cooling water simply evaporates. That's because it's not reused in a closed loop, but sent through cooling towers, where it absorbs heat from servers and escapes as vapor.
In fact, evaporation is the most efficient way of removing heat. And that's why for example, we sweat. When we get too hot, that evaporation of our sweat off of our skin is an effective way of keeping us cool and keeping us from overheating.
Aaron Wemhoff is a data center sustainability expert. Google alone is now said to consume 20 billion liters of water annually in the US. That's a lot of bathtubs. But let's put that in Olympic-sized swimming pools. 50 meters long, that would be 8,000 pools.
I do know several colleagues at Google, and I know that Google is actively trying to do things to mitigate their water footprint.
Worldwide data center water consumption is increasing drastically and is expected to more than double by 2030. In fact, following recent protests, Google has spoken of a commitment to responsible water use and now plans to cool its data center with air instead of water. Sounds like a simple solution, but it's not. Water cools more effectively due to its physical properties. Air cooling ultimately requires more energy, and environmentally friendly electricity is often not sufficiently available for data centers. That's when coal and gas power plants come into play, so maybe water cooling after all?
It is possible or likely that many waterless cooling systems are less energy efficient compared to systems that utilize evaporation. And as a result, you end up just having a higher water footprint upstream at the power generation source as opposed to at the data center site itself.
We've seen this before. In Chile, for instance, where Google's proposed data center drew public backlash over concerns about excessive water use. Santiago's environmental court partially revoked the project's approval, citing insufficient consideration of groundwater and climate impacts. Now Google has to revise its plans and will likely switch to air cooling. So why build so many data centers in hot, dry regions with scarce water?
The main reason for looking for dry areas is both an efficiency reason and an avoidance of corrosion.
The humidity can't be too high, warns researcher Lorena Jaume-Palassi, or the costly equipment will begin to corrode.
If you use something else than drinkable water to cool, if you are using liquid cooling, so this means that you need drinkable water to avoid corrosion, to cool down your data center, and you enrich that water with some sort of chemical stuff. So this means you cannot bring back that water into the normal water circuit.
So conflicts in Chile as well. But what could be done better when choosing locations?
I will say that my opinion as being somebody who is pushing for minimizing the environmental impact of data centers, I would like to see more data centers being built near large bodies of water in cooler climates.
Let's turn to Northern Europe, specifically Sweden. In Falun, about 200 kilometers from Stockholm, there's a remarkable data center pushing the boundaries of design and sustainability. It's all about resource use, water, electricity and more. In Falun, there's no shortage of water. It's drawn from a nearby lake, treated, stored in tanks and sprayed to cool the system using the principle of evaporation. The server rooms themselves are also cooled with water, much of which is reused where possible. Large air ducts blow cold air into the server rooms. This uses electricity. But here it's 100% renewable. Sweden relies on hydroelectric power, both large and small scale, and wind energy also supports the data center. And the processor heat is not just released into the environment.
Some of the water, although of the reused heat, is distributed to a district heating plant just as a neighbor of us, where we supply them with heat in their manufacturing of wooden pellets for furnaces.
Pierre Velander is the Falun site manager. The local energy provider is just across the street. Pellets are dried and burned in a small plant that supplies district heating. Sweden is well suited for data centers. There's plenty of water, wind, and its northern location helps too.
During winter time we have cold temperature. We have like normally 20 degrees below zero, which gives us free cooling actually.
So just let the cold air in. It might not be entirely fair to compare Sweden with Chile or Uruguay, but some ideas might still be transferable. Take wood, for example. In Sweden, it's a sustainable, eco-friendly building material that binds carbon dioxide.
Now we're up to 95% of wood, and we find out that this is the most perfect way of building a computer center.
Back to the point of community input. Falun faced similar concerns as in Uruguay and Chile.
through that whole process, there has been a great focus on having a dialogue with the local population. The people of Falun has been offered to pose and ask any kind of question, and of course they've also been answered when asked those questions in a transparent and open way.
Overall, northern countries offer more pros than cons for data centers, even with factors like higher humidity. At 5,427, the US has the most data centers, followed by Germany at a distant second. In Latin America, there are relatively few. Another one just opened in Memphis, Tennessee, a data center for artificial intelligence. City officials see it as the future, but the locals are furious, especially after learning Elon Musk and his chatbot Grok are behind it. Progress, yes, but not at people's expense. It was built in just 122 days, and it's still growing.
The process and how this business transaction took place was without the knowledge of myself and other council members. I found out on the news.
Water is life. This is an absolutely critical resource that everything needs for survival. Industries do need water for their process. Businesses do need water to make their revenue, but that should never be put in front of the drinking water needs of residents.
People are raising concerns about air and groundwater pollution and ignored environmental laws. Gas turbines are running to generate electricity, producing emissions which, they say, didn't initially have the proper permits. Once again, too little information for those affected. Perhaps a textbook case of how not to do things. Tech giants face accusations of lacking transparency. Amazon, Microsoft and Google are withholding key data on water and electricity use. Google also declined our request to visit their site in Uruguay. At this point, we cannot facilitate a visit to the site nor an interview. Reliable data on electricity and water is scarce.
Most of these other aspects of water consumption are not being indexed, are not being measured, so it's really very intransparent. I have my doubts, yes, because until now, what we can only do as researchers is try to use open source. We really don't know how much water they really consume.
Water consumption is already high and projected to double. But data center electricity consumption will also increase by 128% by 2030. We don't know how chip performance will evolve. Will efficiency gains keep up with ever-increasing demands? The Chinese AI chatbot DeepSeek made headlines for needing less computing power to generate responses. It reportedly uses far less energy than comparable models from OpenAI, Microsoft or Google. Perhaps future electricity and water demands won't be as high as predicted. Amazon, Microsoft and Google say their goal is to be water positive by 2030, meaning they'll provide more water than they use. The tech giants have a clear interest in being efficient and saving energy, but how water positivity will work and whether it's achievable remains unclear and controversial. High water and energy use, that's likely the price of progress, but the environment bears the cost. Small steps can help reduce the computing load, making less resource-intensive videos, using a calculator instead of AI for simple math, or just using a search engine instead of asking AI. Data centers are coming, but people want to know what that means for them. Environmental protection and data production still don't go hand in hand. What's more important to you? Unlimited progress or the sustainable use of resources? Let us know in the comments.